Well, hi everyone. Welcome to Compliance Conversations. This evening I have with me Troy Hector, and I know you all saw his profile that I was putting you out there when I was telling you about this compliance conversation, and I'm so excited that he is here with us. He has a long and amazing career in ICT and knows a lot about technological innovation, which is what we're here to talk about today. So thank you so much for joining me today, Troy. I know it's going to be an educational conversation for me because this is an area that I'm particularly interested in. So I'm going to be, soaking it all up. And I know you're going to, provide a lot of insights for people in my world who are also kind of thinking about technology and what's going on in that space. So again, thank you so much for being here and participating in this conversation.
Thank you, Kadzai. It's a pleasure being here, and thanks for having me at this wonderful forum, and also your listeners from wherever they may be. I'm looking forward to the discussion and hopefully contributing to just the topic of the discussion. I think you've posed some very interesting questions for today's review, and I'm looking forward to debating and perhaps discussing that with any of your audience out there. So looking forward to today's session.
Awesome, thank you. So let's just jump straight into the conversation, right? And technological innovation, when I think about it, it's one of those things that when I was growing up, I'd be sitting there watching TV, right? And you see Knight Rider and Michael Knight and his speaking car and all that, and you'd be like, okay, wow, that's fiction and will never happen. And all of a sudden, we're in this place where now you're hearing about robotics and artificial intelligence and all sorts of developments, cryptocurrency, and all sorts of things that are happening that, back in the day, again, we thought it was just going to be television. And now it seems like it's unfolding right before our eyes, and it's going to even surpass what was imagined back then in the TV world. So I guess my first question to you is, what have you seen in your 20-year career in terms of how technology has just changed the business landscape?
So I think it's a very good time frame to select in terms of 20 years, because that takes us just to the beginning of the new millennium, when things like social media were just about to emerge, and people like Mark Zuckerberg, Sergey Brin, those names seem to become very, very popular. But what is very interesting, if you look at the market cap of the world's biggest companies in early 2001, 4 of the 5 biggest companies were all industrial companies. You're looking at General Electric, you're looking at Massmart, you're looking at the Citigroup, you're looking at Enron, which doesn't exist today. And there was only one tech company at the time, in the form of Microsoft with Bill Gates, that effectively was dominating the global scale in terms of market cap. You would have also wanted to see IBM in there, but they weren't quite as big as Microsoft, but Microsoft was the big tech company at the time. You then advance 10 years from that particular point in time, and you then get to 2019. And guess what? If you look at the 5 biggest market cap companies in the globe today, they are all tech companies. So we're looking at Facebook, we're looking at Amazon, we're looking at Alphabet/Google, we're looking at Netflix, we're looking at Facebook as are the biggest companies that are currently in existence today. And you go back almost 20 years ago, some of those companies weren't even known, they weren't even on the radar, they weren't even on the NASDAQ in New York at that point in time. But today, they are certainly the biggest companies that you have on a global scale. So what does that tell you? I think twofold. One is the way technology has been aggressively pursued by these tech companies to change society, I think is important. And what we've seen, consumption of these technologies growing exponentially across the globe. So consider 20 years ago, Facebook was a no-brand company. Today, they've got more than 2.3 billion users across the globe at this point in time. That means from a population size, it's probably even bigger than China and India put together at this point in time, just to give you an extent of the massive scale and growth that has taken place. Granted, it has come with its own specific challenges and own specific problems, particularly when it comes to data breaches, misinformation, as we saw in the recent US elections in America. But today, it's that the tech companies dominate the global scale, global landscape in terms of market cap. So that effectively, if one considers that context, you will understand today why consumption in technology and television effectively is dying a slow death. Because effectively it hasn't been able to keep up with the pace and change of the way technology has evolved. And people now are consuming their services mainly from mobile platforms, from iPads, from laptops, and they're on the move. You don't have to be sitting on television at a particular date and time to try anywhere on the go at the airport.
You're not rushing home to catch your favorite soapy like you had to do back in the day.
There we go. So in terms of the global scale, Kadzai, tech effectively are changing, effectively engage themselves. If I may just touch a little bit on the tech side of matters, in early 2001, what was called packet switching technology, you heard things like X25 and frame relay, effectively were the predominant networks that effectively connected business offices, small offices to the head office,
Okay.
or connected people from their homes into a business environment. Today, we have the emergence of mobile technology. We're talking about LTE, 4G, and 5G. We're talking Wi-Fi communication, broadband, etc. That is now becoming a predominant communication medium, predominant communication channel for people on the go, irrespective of where they are. So if you're at the airport, you could utilize your Wi-Fi connection with LTE or
Yeah.
4G, home utilizing ADSL. That wasn't in existence 20 years ago. You couldn't actually do that at all. In fact, just over the last 12 months, I was enrolled for a master's program at Wits Business School. And had it not been for the technologies like Google Meet or Microsoft Teams, we would not have been able to conduct those sessions. And I'm sure there are lots of people out there that can relate to that. So technology has become an integral solution to some of the challenges like the COVID-19 pandemic that we've seen at this stage.
Mm.
Businesses, people have become a lot more reliant on those technologies. It could be also described as being addictive up to a point, but just think of the consequences for businesses if we didn't have the internet, if we didn't have Wi-Fi, if we didn't have Microsoft Teams or Zoom or any one of the other video conferencing tools today. It could have been catastrophic for a lot of key businesses out there. So I think to answer your question in very, very simple terms, I think there's probably three major trends we've seen over the last 20 years. One is the dominance of tech companies, surpassing industrial companies who've taken decades to get where they are. In less than 20 years, the
Yeah.
biggest tech companies today. Secondly, we've seen a heavy reliance on tech. So today, just think of yourself in terms of your own personal behaviors. Can you get throughout your day without utilizing Twitter or LinkedIn or social media, for example? And thirdly, what digital tools they can use strategically to achieve their business objectives. 20 years ago, that would not have been part of your boardroom discussions.
I mean, it's so interesting to me because, like you said, the process of industrialization took like decades, and companies grew and became these behemoths of organizations. But then, like you're saying, in under 20 years, those have been overtaken by tech companies. So the rapid nature of it is also quite daunting sometimes when you think about it. Because if we're here after 20 years, what is this world going to look like in another 10 years, in another 20 years? And is it more of the same? Is it going to be a sci-fi movie and we're all it's these are the things. And when you think about it from a human perspective, a lot of the sort of high level conversations I have, people are actually wondering, so where do we fit into this equation at the end of the day? Because soon, everyone's fear is we're going to be replaced by machines and just be sitting at home doing nothing with ourselves. So it's what are your thoughts in terms of if you see in what do you foresee the world looking like in like 10 years time, for example, based on the rapid nature of how we got where we are now?
So, a very good question. I'm a very strong believer in the consumption and the adoption of technology, whether it's in your personal capacity or whether it's in a business capacity specifically. And let me just use one practical example in terms of how technology can help human existence. So, In Israel, in the Middle East, there is a medical company that has the technology available to say that a half an hour before a patient of theirs is about to get a heart attack, there will be an ambulance with an emergency personnel at the door to saying, "Sir, please get in the ambulance. You're going to have a heart attack in the next 30 minutes. We need to rush you to hospital immediately." So the issue of preventative care is a lot more cost effective than the post medical treatment that has to go with an operation of that sort. And that can only be enabled by technology, by Wi Fi, by artificial intelligence, by the Internet of Things, by machine learning, etc., to determine when an individual does become potentially a danger or risk to his or her particular health at the end of the day. So there are going to be some benefits, a lot of benefits associated with technology, and I'm hoping that it will improve the overall quality of humanity, the overall quality of lifestyle, the overall quality of how we engage with each other in a global context. And I think technology itself will play a very, very significant role. So if one comes from the agricultural era to the industrial era to the computer era to the fourth industrial revolution, technology by and large has allowed man to progress in hopefully a very progressive manner and hopefully also improve the quality of life going forward. A close example is, for example, the mRNA technology that has been developed specifically for the COVID-19 vaccine, and how quickly that technology, even though it was 20 years in the making, it was able to be deployed very, very rapidly, and within a matter of months, it was able to produce, the first vaccine or set of vaccines in the marketplace to confront this pandemic. So technology itself, I think, does play an integral part in providing solutions, remedies, and also guidance for human beings to ensure that they can live a better quality of life and also save life where actually warranted. Of course, there is the converse argument that suggests that technology will replace mankind and effectively jobs effectively will be shedded in the marketplace. There's also the suggestion that technology can be used for very nefarious purposes. So one thinks of drones and laser-guided missiles, for example, in warfare or in nuclear technologies, etc. There's also the notion that technology itself could be used to effectively depress countries across the globe by withholding that technology from certain societies. So there are the adverse consequences of technology in one form or the other. I believe going forward, for a younger generation coming through the schooling system, going through primary, secondary school, and perhaps considering a career going into university and beyond, that technology, digitalization, engineering, computer science effectively has to be foremost in mind in terms of those youngsters coming into the marketplace going forward. The retirement and retrenchment of people that have been there for many years, going through from the baby boomers to the generations to follow, is going to be a very, very difficult one. And the challenge that the businesses and society and government as a whole are going to battle to try and retrain those people to effectively become more productive in society. So the question is, do you take people with industrial sort of backgrounds to move into the digital world, or do you allow your younger generation to grow, to develop, and to nurture and consume those technologies as you move forward? So it is not a very easy answer, and I don't have a specific solution to how that will be dealt, other than to say that I'm bullish about the way technology is being developed, particularly under the fourth industrial revolution banner, artificial intelligence, machine learning, big data analytics, etc., because I believe that will improve the quality of life and the quality of human mankind. At the same token, there are consequences of job losses and the difficulty, if not impossible task, of retraining people to adapt to this new world going forward. So that is sort of my hopefully back.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you on in terms of I have a belief that there's definitely a place for technology in terms of improving the quality of life, access to healthcare, financial inclusion, all those type of things can definitely be brought about by advancements in technology. I mean, if you look at financial inclusion, for example, all the platforms and like that are based on mobile technology and making financial services available in that regard, I find quite quite fascinating. You know, people who under normal circumstances wouldn't be reached or catered to or serviced by your traditional banks having to have a branch in a particular area, can now be serviced as a result of mobile technology. And, you know, I mean, the famous example is in Pesa, for example, and all that that's done in Kenya. And, you know, there are lots of different offerings that we have here in South Africa that are also based on mobile technology. So I see the advantage, but I also do get the other side of the skills concerns. So on the one hand, you know, this technological advancement has happened so rapidly that people have not been able to kind of upskill fast enough to keep up with it. So you have a very, you know, limited number of people who understand it, who can work in different spaces, and you know, be effective in, you know, the technology deployment element of it. So you've got a high demand for people with those skills, and then you've got everybody else who's sitting there and like, okay, I've been in my role, in my job for 30 years, I'm good at what I do, but they've just implemented this new technological platform. We're doing cloud computing now. I don't know what this all means. Does this mean I've become redundant? So there's some really real fears that, you know, come along with, you know, how do you upskill those people? Are they willing to, or are they too intimidated by the whole idea of having to learn about? And I'll confess, before I actually started actively looking into it, I was the girl that I was like, just fix it. I don't need to know how it's working, and just tell me what to do and where to press. So, you know, there's a lot of people who are intimidated by technology in that respect. So I do kind of understand that there's the value, but if you're not in the space actively already, it can seem like, you know, it's an almost an insurmountable thing to be able to be part of this new world that's coming around.
Absolutely. And let me just perhaps add to that. There may be some light at the end of the tunnel, and it really depends on the attitude of the individual that has been made redundant. And let me just perhaps give you a practical example. So, if the person that has been around for 30 years is made redundant for whatever reason, and that particular person then decides to become an entrepreneur and start his or her own business, they effectively then can employ or solicit the skills that are digitalized or 4IR compliant to effectively try and grow the business. So long as that entrepreneur has just a basic understanding of how the technology stack fits together, how it can be utilized in a business context, and then gets the experts, the people that can actually do the bits and bytes, the program, the hardcore sort of design, etc., getting that into place, then becomes, I think, a solution ultimately going forward. It may be better, in my view, to try and retrain an old dog, and I use the word old dog very respectfully, but as I said, I'm seeing in the marketplace today is that if an entrepreneur does have the acumen just to have a very basic understanding, not a detailed, in-depth technical understanding of 4IR, and then employs specific graduate skills in data science, in artificial intelligence, virtual reality, to effectively craft a new business model, to service a new market need, to effectively resolve a society's problem, that I think is an opportunity ultimately going forward. So if I was to put a national policy in place that people that have been in the banking industry or been in the retail industry, if there was a need for them to learn entrepreneurship skills to run small businesses and effectively try and identify a market niche and move away from sort of the agricultural commodity type sort of small business environment and move more to a service oriented environment, that potentially could be a solution ultimately going forward. There are some green shoots in terms of what I've seen people do in the fintech space. It's not quite in the sense that it's going to absorb all the unemployed in the marketplace as a whole. But I think just as a suggestion from a policy point of view at a national level, perhaps once those people are retrenched or they become retired, it may be better for the economy and society as a whole that you actually teach those people to become business entrepreneurs, maybe put some funding behind and running entrepreneur with some very good skills to ensure you can try and grow that. Not a holistic solution to resolve the entire unemployment crisis we have in the country at the moment.
And a crisis it is. I mean, the latest report of what was it, 32.5% that we're sitting at the moment, and that's actively seeking, not including people who have decided that they're just done with the job search. So the numbers are definitely much higher. But
Indeed.
I mean, we definitely need more creative solutions in terms of how people can use these type of technologies to empower themselves, start entrepreneurial initiatives. And my view is that don't people shouldn't think about it as, okay, I need to start a business now and I need to start doing a course in artificial intelligence and become a data scientist and, tick all these boxes. And until I'm an expert in them, then I can't go into them. It's really about gaining a a basic understanding, have a good foundation so that you know where those technologies could potentially be of use to you in your business. And then you get the person who's actually skilled in that department to work with you and kind of then take it to the next level. And I think that's kind of what intimidates a lot of people, is that they feel that unless I become a data scientist or robotics engineer, I'm not going to have a place in the fourth industrial revolution. And that's not my belief, and I certainly don't have that intention. But I do know that I need to have an appreciation of those things and how they could potentially work for me, so that if I do need to deploy it in my business in a year's time, 2 years time, I'm not a total blank slate that has to start from scratch. So this is also why I wanted us to have this conversation, so that it kind of gets people thinking about, okay, you know what? Yes, technology, the nuts and bolts of it can be intimidating, but if I get a high level understanding of it and its benefits, then potentially I can figure out how to make it work for me, and I don't have to become a data scientist or suddenly an IT specialist. I can contact someone like yourself who's got a 20-year career and can point me in the right direction and, start from there. So, yeah, I think there's definitely is room for the people who are, have been in their careers for a long time to still make use of technology and not be put to pasture, so to speak.
Yeah, indeed. And once again, it's a combination of that intellectual property that individual does possess and how they actually apply their minds ultimately going forward. And it's not to say that what they did in 30 years needs to go to waste. It can be applied, repackaged in a very, very different manner. The only thing that I would advocate very, very strongly, that there has to be a digital element, digital thinking, digital philosophy behind how they do take things forward. Maybe in their previous employment, they could take some of those lessons and ultimately move forward. But I once again emphasize the fact being an entrepreneur, I think, is an exciting venture. It's not always easy. It does take perseverance, some dedication, and some grit within oneself. But I think if you've got a good business idea and you can articulate that to a team and inspire them through that vision, that articulation
Yeah.
itself, and let the techies work out, okay, what building blocks do I have to put in place? Do I go robotics? Do I go data analytics? Do I go the Internet of Things? What Wi-Fi technology should I use, etc., etc.? Let them decide that. But I think if you can articulate at a very high level what it is you'd like to achieve to service a particular market need, I think that could be one solution in terms of how we deal with unemployment, retrenchment in the fourth industrial revolution, but combine that institutional memory, that IP that the person has collected, and combining with the millennial generation coming through from university and that are sort of more 4IR qualified to deal with the complexities of technology.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely like the gold standard that you're looking for, to have the expertise and the skills that people have accumulated over the years, which I think are still very valuable and very valid, but making it applicable in a digital environment. So when I look at my space, for example, the compliance space, in the corporate, when I've worked in corporate, it was, there's a lot of manual processes that are sitting in there that I find to be, very inefficient, and time just gets spent doing a lot of manual processes that, if you had that time to actually apply to risk management and thinking about it and, implementing new methodologies and letting those more manual processes be handled by technology, then just imagine the possibilities of how much more effective a compliance or risk professional can be, because technologies come in and they're doing the monitoring, they're doing the reporting, and all we have to do is, what we are actually wanting to spend 90% of our time anyway, which is actually risk analysis, using the skills that we have and, our qualifications and all the rest of it to add value to a business, as opposed to spending time data capturing and the rest of it. So I really believe in this in my profession as well, that there's definitely a space for technology. I know there's lots of platforms, customer due diligence, monitoring, reporting that are being put out there, even in the reg tech space, for regulatory reporting and things like that, that are, I think, as they gain momentum, because I think adoption of those things has been a bit slow, in that space. But I think once people start getting a lot more comfortable and, businesses are willing to put more budget behind it, they're going to see the efficiencies that arise from implementing these technologies and, allowing people to do what they do best, which is the human elemental stuff, the analysis and all the rest of it. So I'm excited to see what the future holds in that respect for a compliance and risk potential, let alone, everything else in healthcare and all of that sort of thing.
And absolutely, you're correct. And I probably would add just a tech component to that, Kudzai, which is becoming very interesting. So I'm aware that some of the universities in America, if you're a legal practitioner wanting to become an attorney in that part of the world, they're now also encouraging those legal practitioners to take a course in technology specifically. Because when you talk about things like smart contracts, which effectively are computer written contracts between two parties, it negates the need for actually a legal professional, a legal attorney, to be actually drafting those particular contracts. And it may also even apply to retailers or people that are medical professionals. So as much as you want to become a cardiologist, for example, it's going to be important that you also understand the tech that you're going to be exposed to and how you can actually deploy that ultimately going forward. So what I think is happening on a global scale right now is that institutions, leading institutions that can see how the fourth industrial revolution is going to impact society, the economy and government operations going forward, are looking at ways to say, well, if you're going to be an attorney, a legal professional, tell me how I can utilize your legal expertise and also bundle that with some digital tools ultimately going forward. And if one looks at Bitcoin, for example, today, if you open up a Bitcoin contract, you don't need a legal practitioner to actually do that. That is done through a process of smart contracts. So if you look at Ethereum and all the other cryptocurrencies out there, and effectively it's a set of rules that are predetermined, that is negotiated between buyer and seller, and effectively that is executed via a blockchain platform, for example. So, in essence, when you do sort of decide to select a career going forward, just think about the tech element in terms of what you're going to be doing. I'm going to perhaps put a very sort of engineering bias to this call, say that I think data scientists, engineers, electronic, etc., are going to be very, very key people going forward, because ultimately they're going to support all the other non-engineering disciplines in the world to make certain things happen. So whether you're a retailer, whether you're in the medical profession, whether you're in the legal profession, you're going to need some sort of data scientists to help guide you through the complexities of those technologies. But to the point that you do make, I mean, just think of all the times that you've sat in traffic or sat in meetings and not achieved anything, and you've gone through wads of paper, and then you've got to come back a week later to go through the same discussion again. If you were to digitize that entire process, and ultimately what you would like as management is to understand almost real time what is happening, what is broken, where do I fix it, and what do I have to do to try and move forward. And that's ultimately what you want to try and do. So I am a very strong proponent that digital technologies can help improve decision making. It can help improve customer service. It can significantly reduce operational inefficiencies within an organization. And therefore, it's imperative that people do understand how to utilize specific technology building blocks that are in the domain of digital frameworks to understand how you do take things forward in your business. Because without that, work with a typewriter that was available in the 1950s, 1960s, and trying to compete with an iPad or an Apple Mac machine in the marketplace today. Sort of that sort of scenario that one is looking at. So it's going to be imperative that as business leaders, and this one thing is, it's something that can be learned. Even if you've been an industrialist for decades, you can actually learn these technologies, you can learn these business best practices. And to emphasize once again, you don't have to be a hardcore techie to understand that. But if you understand the business framework, the strategic objectives, the mission that you're trying to achieve, and you were able to articulate that to a group of engineers, data scientists, I think you could have a very, very compelling value proposition that you could take to the marketplace.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. It's about, that whole element of collaboration, right? At the end of the day, that we are going to have to learn how to collaborate with people who are specialists in these fields and allow them to educate us and to build help us build models that are going to be fit for purpose in the future. I mean, what's the point of me, saying I'm starting a business or I'm running a business and the services that I'm offering are going to be as manual as the people I'm trying to help, and they're like, okay, so what's your value add at the end of the day? When I'm coming to a consultant, I'm looking for increased efficiencies and all of this sort of thing, and you're coming here with a spreadsheet. So I think it's imperative that when anyone is thinking of starting a business, or even when you're operating as an employee in an office, you're looking for opportunities where you can, maybe try and introduce new technologies or lobby and say, you know what, there's a better way that this can be done. We're spending 16 hours a day compiling reports or, submitting or trying to, connect this person to this person on our platform, and there's no connectivity there. How can we do this better, and what does that do in terms of freeing up time for us to do other things? So definitely, I think collaboration with people in the tech space is very important for people to able to do that. And to move forward. And I know that you touched a little bit about cryptocurrencies and what's happening at Ethereum and Bitcoin and all of these wonderful things in our world. And just from a regulatory perspective, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, there was a notice put out by the local regulator saying that they're people should be wary of cryptocurrency. It's not safe. And then I think in Nigeria as well, they've banned banks from, participating in cryptocurrency and all of that. So although in the beginning, when I was observing, the regulatory policy position around it, they seem to be like, okay, we're looking at this and we're trying to see what the benefits are and if it's going to impact financial stability. And now it's kind of they've taken a step back and they're like a bit like, okay, whoa, this is looking a bit volatile and dangerous for consumers. And, so they're putting out this messaging. I mean, do you have any thoughts around, whether we need more regulation, less regulation, what the direction that the regulators seem to be going?
Yeah, so that's an interesting point, Kudzai. So my immediate response would be that I think we need less regulation, particularly when it comes to digital currencies and and cryptocurrencies. But let me also qualify that. It does not mean that all the guardrails need to be off. I think there still need to be some guardrails in place to ensure that there is a healthy respect between buyer and seller, and that nobody is cheated at the end of the day. I think let's just establish why cryptocurrencies came into being. And we need to go back to 2009, 2010, just post the financial crisis on a global scale, which sort of originated in America. We saw the submortgage, subprime problem in America, and we saw the catastrophic impact that it had not on America but on all markets going forward. Interest rates in South Africa were reaching something like 20% plus at that particular point in time, and effectively it was through greed, effectively, to put it very bluntly, in America, that resulted in that particular catastrophe. Come about Satoshi Nakamoto, we don't know who this individual is or group of individuals are, but then they wrote a white paper that effectively gave the existence or the eminence of what today is known as Bitcoin and blockchain. And we've seen today that there's more than about 6,500 different cryptocurrencies in the marketplace. So one needs to ask yourself two questions. One, cryptocurrencies and what is society going to have as a whole. So the answer to the first question is that people have become less trustworthy with traditional banks because of the disappointments coming out of 2009, 2010 after the financial crisis. And there was a need specifically to look at alternative ways of getting access to finance. We've seen some policy sort of advancements like PSD2 in the European market, which effectively had dictated that traditional commercial banks open up the last mile to the consumer to allow fintech companies to effectively play in that particular marketplace. And the main aim of that really was to reduce transactional costs, was to effectively encourage innovation and also competition and hopefully have a better quality of service in the marketplace. We haven't seen anything similar in South Africa as yet, although it has been mooted. I know that the SARB and South African Revenue Service have taken a very light touch approach to cryptocurrencies and have not sort of published any particular framework or policy as yet as far as that is concerned. They put out white papers. They've also gone through the COCA project just to kind of give a sense of what their thinking is and how they could potentially take things forward from there. Literally within the last 2 weeks, you've seen an announcement by the central bank where they were looking at a central bank digital currency that they're going to introduce into the marketplace. And they effectively want to have some sort of hold on how digital currencies, digital assets, tokens effectively are regulated in this market, and hence the emergence of a CBDC. Now, just for clarity, maybe your users may not know this, but there is a fundamental difference between the way cryptocurrencies are administered versus the way a central bank digital currency is administered. And the distinction is very simple in the sense that in a cryptocurrency world where you're exchanging Bitcoin or Ethereum or a stable coin, for example, there is no central banking authority or even a country that dictates how that transaction takes place. So what happens between buyer and seller? How do they validate the transaction? In very, very simple terms, they go through a process of mining. They have what they call the proof of stake. And once they have validated the transaction, both between the buyer and the seller, the encryption keys are validated. The transaction then is effectively authorized, mined, and then is placed on the blockchain, which then becomes immutable, which means you can't change that record going forward. But there's no authority involved in that particular process. In the case of a central bank digital currency, it is the equivalent of a Bitcoin, but effectively administered by the central banking authority, like the South African Reserve Bank. So effectively, what has been looked at on a global scale is that central banks effectively want to have a digital equivalent of their fiat currency. So, for example, in South Africa, you have the physical coin and you have the physical printed note, and now they want to place that physical currency onto a digital platform like a mobile platform going forward in the form of a central bank digital currency. This is an emerging field. We have seen the International Monetary Fund, the International Bank of Settlements, published position papers on that going forward, and just giving some guidance in terms of how that does move forward. But I would advocate that I think less regulation is going to be required in that particular space as you move to a digital world, likewise on cryptocurrencies, because effectively that is pretty well administrated and is almost, and I use the word almost, unhackable in one form or the other, because the security and the security protocols are so tight. I'm not saying it's totally impossible to do that, but it's at least unhackable to a very large degree. The key benefit of moving to a digital platform with less regulation is that, one, it reduces the operational inefficiencies within the system. And in current research that I'm undertaking at the moment, I've established that it costs more than 80 billion rand per annum to actually have the current printed note in circulation across the country. So that is everything from printing the notes to minting the coin, to effectively transporting it, securing it, to putting it into ATMs, to effectively cleaning it on a regular basis to ensure that customers can handle proper notes, etc., etc. It costs me more than 80 billion rand per annum. You put that into a digital format, in the case of a CBDC, or you have a Bitcoin, that operational cost is almost close to zero. And just think of what savings, what efficiencies you can drive into the marketplace. So my anticipation is that moving forward with the CBDC, that there should be less regulation, but you should still have very, very firm guardrails in place. And as evidence to support that argument, if you look at Bitcoin, if you look Ethereum, look at stablecoin, look at current 6,500 plus cryptocurrencies that are running in the marketplace. In not one instant is there a central banking authority in place. There's no regulation, there's no Bitcoin rule or legislation that governs the way things are to be done on a global scale. There's no IMF policy, there's no World Bank policy. They may have a position or an opinion on it, but nobody says that this is the way Bitcoin is actually going to be derived. So that provides you with evidence empirically on a global scale for the last decade or so, since Satoshi Nakamoto became this sort of very interesting phenomenon, that you can actually run a currency without the need for heavy regulation or even a central banking authority going forward. People may have a different opinion. I'm open to correction on that, but in terms of the facts and the evidence that are out there today, adopting a digital currency, I think, is a lot more beneficial for society going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I see where you're coming from, but at the same time, when I'm trying to think about the mandate of a central bank and financial regulators, a big part of that outside of financial stability is also consumer protection, right? So, there's sophisticated investors and participants in financial services, and then there's not so sophisticated individuals who might not be quite well versed with how this actually works, how values derived, and what are the risks and benefits of transacting in a particular way. So I kind of understand why a regulator would be wary of moving too quickly in just saying, okay, go ahead and run with it, and we hope it works out. To your point, there's 6,500 of these currencies globally, which I guess when you look at the global economy, it's not something that, as it stands today, I guess is necessarily going to trigger a financial crisis. But to our earlier point, in terms of how fast everything is progressing and growing, we don't know what that market is going to look like, let's say in 10 years' time. And my thinking is then, the regulator should probably, at this stage in the game, should be putting around a framework that is, and it's hard to put something in place that's fit for purpose for 20 years later, but at least starting to think about and design and understand, if this becomes something that's systemically significant, how are we going to manage it so that we're not having a repeat of 2008, 2009, but in this space, and it's going to end up having an impact systemically. So I get the concerns, and I feel there is a need for regulation. But again, it's also something, you don't want regulation that is so vast and so impactful that it kills it at the end of the day. Because to your point, there are definite advantages to having cryptocurrencies in place, operational efficiencies, cost effectiveness, and all of that. But we need to figure out how is it going to work in a way that, should it grow to be systemically important, it's not going to systemically impactful. It's not going to, be a problem for us in the future to try and control the beast when it's grown, when it's a teenager, as opposed to trying to, discipline it now. So it's about finding the balance in my mind anyway.
No, absolutely. And I think just to be sort of provocative for a moment, the financial sector is probably one of the most heavily regulated sectors on a global scale. And I'm not a financial expert or financial regulator, but you think of things like Basel, you think of all the very stringent regulations around the current financial system that is in place on a global scale. And you ask yourself very critically some very pertinent questions. So one, if we had all this regulation, all this legislation on a global scale, why did it have to happen that we had the financial crisis in 2008, 2009? Why is it a fact that poverty on a global scale has increased? Why is it on a global scale that countries have still become uncompetitive? Why is it in local markets that unemployment has increased despite the fact that there's heavy regulation? Why is there less financial inclusion that is prominent or very prominent in countries like South Africa, as an example, at this stage? And one needs to then ask that question very, very critically. Has that regulation or over-regulation helped? And has it actually resulted in the right behaviors of our financial institutions to address things like poverty, unemployment, job creation, etc.? And I would argue empirically, and that's probably one of the reasons why something new, something disruptive like cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin and blockchain, I think was a necessary evil to come into this world and effectively try and find a different solution. So as I said, I mean, just ignore the very sort of computer science heavy text in Satoshi Nakamoto's white paper that he published in 2010, and you just try and see the ethos coming out. We can't trust traditional financial institutions. We can't trust the regulators that financially control the way the environment works because they've proven to be unreliable and trustworthy going forward. That effectively is the essence that comes out of that white paper itself, and a different solution was to be required. And you couldn't rely on those traditional bankers, traditional regulators to find the solutions for them because they've had decades, if not centuries, to try and improve the way society conducts itself to reduce unemployment, to reduce poverty, and they still haven't found the solution as yet. So I am enthused by the Bitcoin and cryptocurrency emergence. And effectively, it's saying to the world that we need a different solution because traditional banking systems, even though, yes, it runs the global economy, for every citizen on this country right now, but it's not delivering the true value to the farmer in Bangladesh or the shopkeeper in Kenya or the maintenance plumber, for example, working in Limpopo. It may not be delivering the value, and therefore something else is fundamentally required at this point in time. So I would advocate very strongly cryptocurrencies for this disruption because we need to find something a lot more alternative, a lot more elegant in the marketplace to deal with this change. And also just recently, over the last 2 weeks, when Bitcoin sort of exceeded the $50,000 threshold, cryptocurrencies were valued at more than $1 trillion, okay, in comparison to the $8 trillion, that traditional economy. So you can see that it is catching up and it has momentum ultimately going forward. And when you see global players like Elon Musk from Tesla that invest $1.5 billion in Bitcoin, and some of the other proponents like Jeff Bezos from Amazon, for example, talking about that, you do see a spike in Bitcoin because that effectively suggests confidence in the way the currency is being deployed at this stage. So I would advocate that. I think there is a very, very strong argument. If you look at the potential policy failures of the heavy regulation we've had in the past, even though they do have some existence and a reason to exist, and of course it protects the consumer, the point that you made, which I am very, very familiar with. You still ask yourself the question, how is it that some people can get onto a private jet, full bags loaded with cash, and then jet off to the Middle East and escape, local authorities in South Africa, etc.
Now you can escape with Bitcoin, right? It's not
Oh,
cash anymore.
you can't pack Bitcoin into a suitcase. What you can do is that there will be a digital and audible trail of every one of that Bitcoin.
We'll be
You
able to
can't,
find this Bitcoin trail.
you can't do that with cash at this point in time. So that's the reason I think the central bank digital currency, I think, is a great sort of leapfrog movement on the part of the South African Reserve Bank. And as I mentioned, then they sort of put a public announcement out recently, and I think that is certainly going to grow in future. But I don't see cryptocurrencies sort of dying a sudden death. I think there will be definitely a need for that ultimately going forward. The question, however, is in 10 to 15 years' time, is whether fiat currencies as we know today will still be in existence in terms of the paper format or in the coin format. As a matter of interest, in America, for example, they try to get rid of the little penny that they use in the marketplace. And even during Barack Obama's era as president, the 2 terms that he ran, he tried to actually get the Americans to retire that penny because it was costing the American economy more than $14 billion per annum just to have the penny in circulation in that marketplace as a whole. And at the end, he almost just gave up and said, Americans love their penny just too much. We can't get rid of it. So that is a
And if
practical example.
yeah, I mean, I can't. At the top of my head, I'm just trying to think. Okay, if grandma who's sitting in Limpopo or wherever in the Free State, and you want to tell her about Bitcoin, she's just going to look at you like you're crazy. Like, no, she puts her money under the pillow, or in her duk, or whatever it is, and I'm not speaking for all grandmothers, so please don't crucify me and say but I'm just saying, there's certain people out there who they just want to touch and feel fiat currency and see that, okay, I can go to an ATM and withdraw cash, and it's going to take a lot to change mentality of people to be like, okay, I'm going to go to tap for my Bitcoin in the shop to buy a loaf of bread or whatever.
That is true, and I would agree with you, Katsai. You make a very valid point. And in research that I'm currently doing right now, all of the participants had mentioned the education component and the potential risk that if people do not adapt to this new way of transacting, it could be a systemic failure that your currency will not be widely accepted. But in the South African context, I take comfort from the fact that if you look at mobile technology specifically, which sort of started around 93, 94, in South Africa, and you look at the adoption of mobile technology in this particular market space. So talking about the Gogo and Limpopo or anywhere across the country right now, almost every citizen has got a mobile phone. And guess what? You didn't have to teach them how to utilize it. If they just knew how to press certain numbers and press the call and maybe send an SMS, they were comfortable adopting to that technology. And I recall a conference that I attended a couple of years ago, specifically on ICT, where people said very clearly, do not confuse people that are illiterate or uneducated as being unintelligent. You can put a phone into somebody's hands and just show them the basics of it, and they could master that within a couple of seconds to actually utilize that particular technology. And you've taken the similar thinking to a cryptocurrency. They don't have to physically feel the cash, but for example, if you show them on a screen that you've got, say, 100 Rand in your bank account, and to buy the loaf of bread, let's say it's 20 Rand, for example, you can have 80 Rand left in your bank account, etc. That can be done very easily, in my view. So I certainly believe as much as education is going to be fundamentally important, I'm not too concerned that people are going to be averse to adopting the technology ultimately going forward. Because, for example, you could communicate to them that there's going to be less risk in terms of carrying physical cash on you. So, for example, if you're in public transport, taxi, or train, nobody can rob you of your physical cash, which effectively is a health hazard today. If you just working for a month and you get your pay, it is always a concern for people traveling on public transport, whether it's by bus or train, that there's going to be some nefarious character sitting around the corner waiting for you with a knife and then sort of deprive you of your hardcore earnings. That problem becomes null and void when effectively you're moving to a digital environment. So there are going to be some society benefits that I think that can be very, very clearly articulated, and it will require an aggressive education program, I think at all levels, whether it's commercial banks, whether it's the South African Reserve Bank, whether it's the government, local government, NGOs, etc. They're going to have to play a very, very significant role in that. But I'm less concerned about that because, as I said, take the mobile example in South Africa. We've got more mobile phones in the country today than the physical population. So there's more than 56 million mobile devices out there today. And we've got about 56 million people in the country at this stage. So that gives you just a sense of how people have actually absorbed and consumed mobile technologies in this country.
Yeah, for sure. I know I have two phones. So I'm definitely not the only one who's double hatting. But no, I get your point, and I think it's going to happen. It's going to take some time, and people are going to have to adapt. But it's not a hurdle that can't be overcome. To your point, the example of mobile phones. Our grandmothers didn't have them before. Now they have them. We text them, we call them, and we send them money on them. So
yes,
if you can adapt to that, then it's really about embedding that message and making sure people understand the safety of it, the security of it, that the value in terms of so what does it mean in terms of Bitcoin in real terms in my life. I mean, and other cryptocurrencies, whichever one people are using, and as people get to understand that, they'll feel more more comfortable around, transacting in that way going forward. So it's very interesting to watch that space and see how things are going to develop over time. Are the fears going to be overcome, and are we going to be, driving car? What did it drive all these sort of interesting flying cars in 20 years? Or are we, going to be rid of fiat currencies at the end of the day? It's just one of those things that we have to wait and see. But what I am particularly passionate about is not taking a wait and see approach in terms of adapting our mindsets to what we need to do to make use of these technologies, because they're here, they're not going anywhere. And we as people need to see, so how is this going to make my life easier? How can I do things more efficiently using, whether it's in your job, whether it's in your business, whether it's just in your day-to-day life? And I think we do it already with so many things in our mobile technology. People arm their security with mobile, and you can see who's at your front door on your phone when you're not in the house. There's so many technologies that we've slowly adapted and not really realized that, okay, this is innovation that's happening, that who knew you could know who was at your front door when you weren't there 10 years ago. But it's something that we're doing now. So I think over time people will adopt, but I think maybe the rate of adoption is going to, for some of the scarier types of technologies, which you potentially get a bad rep, yeah, might be a little bit slower, but I think it will happen with time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's going to take, I do believe it's going to take a very concerted effort, from public and private sector to get that adoption ultimately going. And I think even, the younger generations of a particular family, so the grandchildren or great grandchildren of Gogo, can show them how to utilize the technology and also the benefits of it. And just think of all the communication that, apart from communicating now your bank balance that you have specifically on a mobile device, what other types of information that you can communicate as well. So typically information about COVID, to say, look, your COVID vaccine is, your second dose is available. There are some inherent benefits associated with that ultimately going forward. And the risk of, physically carrying money, which becomes a problem at this stage, effectively will then ultimately go away. Now, I would like to see perhaps within 10, 15 years, if not sooner, that we eliminate the fiat currency from our market. And one argument that I'm putting forward at the moment is the cost. It costs more than 80 billion rand per annum for this economy to be printing money, transporting money, storing money across the country at this stage. That 80 billion rand can be put to better use for clinics, for schools, for hospitals.
Schools, hospitals, and all sorts of things that could be built, and cash in transit gets put out of business very quickly. And that's just
Yeah,
me thinking at the top of my head. I'm sure if I applied my mind, I could think of a lot of other benefits or things we could do with $80 billion per annum. So, I mean, rands per annum. So,
just
yeah.
And just to that point, Kadzar, which is very important, just think of the corruption that you can eliminate. So here's one thing that you probably are going to anticipate. One, you're probably going to have some pushback from political force in the country not to adopt a CBDC, because effectively it may sort of be turning off those funnels on those brown envelopes that they may be getting inadvertently. By putting all of this into a central digital bank currency where there's a digital trail, like footprints in the sand, you can actually follow the trail of the money ultimately going forward. So I don't want to get into the political thing. That is not my area of expertise,
Yeah.
but
I was about to like jump in there, and I'm like, okay, I'm looking at the time, and I'm also like, okay, this is a rabbit hole that let me just like not go in there. But it's yeah, well, we can only be hopeful at this stage. I'm losing a lot of hope on that front, but we'll see how it goes.
no,
This
absolutely.
might the silver bullet that we're looking for to deal with corruption, but who knows? We'll have to wait and see. Okay,
Yeah.
but before we close, Troy, and I want to let you have your Friday evening, so I'm not going to keep you too long. But so if there's people out there who are interested in, upskilling themselves, getting a bit more understanding of, things like, central bank digital currencies, what's happening in the cryptocurrency space, and just, be more informed so that they can just make an informed, have informed opinions about, the innovations that are coming up and going to be very big in the next 10 years. And so what would you recommend they do to kind of just themselves out of the space of being what is the word, a Luddite? And
Yeah, no, that's
so
important.
I'm being a Luddite, let me dive in. What are the first steps that they should should take?
All right, so let me just share personal experience with you because I think it's a very, very valid point. It was one of the 5 questions that you had sent in advance. About 5 years ago, I didn't know about fintech. I didn't know about cryptocurrencies as such. But what I did do was I came across some very interesting online learning platforms where all these technologies, where all this information could be consumed in sort of chunk sizes. Doing a week course that you can do online. You need to know about fintech or cryptocurrencies, even going into artificial intelligence, robotics, virtual reality, you name it, effectively are available online as we speak today. And that's the key benefit with these online learning platforms. And without being promoting one above the other, you can think of Coursera, you can think of edX. There's the CFT website, which offers and specializes in fintech specifically. Universities in particular are also coming to the party. So the University of Cape Town, for example, has got a brilliant fintech course, which is being handled by Kopieg, who is the facilitator there. You can also go to Wharton University as well to get some executive education in fintech. So there are a range of these very, very powerful platforms out there in the marketplace today, which effectively allows you to consume these products. And actually, these are very short courses. You can go through the course material. They're not interactive and live, but you can consume them in a sort of asymmetric manner. You're then given some assignments or tasks and quizzes, and if you pass them, normally the pass mark is about 80%, you then get to the point of actually getting a little certificate to say that you've done this course, so you get some sort of recognition for that as well. If you're feeling really, really bullish, there are the same platforms like Coursera, for example, that are offering master's programs in sort of entrepreneurship or business analytics that you can also pursue if you wish as well. And that effectively is another option to go for. So look at these options that are available in the marketplace today. There's a lot of online learning that you can consume, and you can do it from the comfort of your home, behind your desk, in the bed, lying by the swimming pool, behind the kitchen counter. And you can do this on an ad hoc basis. There's no
Can't sleep.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. If you're looking for something to do over the weekend and the sport is not to your satisfaction, then you can just log on to one of these courses and go through them. And I said I literally have done more than 100 of these over the last 4 years, and the material is normally very, very excellent. You get these peer reviews, and I think that'll be a good starting point. If you do have the appetite, you can then register at a formal tertiary institution that is offering courses in this regard. The University of Cape Town, for example, has got a master's program in fintech that you can effectively consider. I haven't seen any similar program at any of the other institutions other than at the Wits Business School, which actually has a module which forms part of the digital business program that focuses on fintech at this stage. So there's a lot of literature out there that one can really consume to pick up about fintech and cryptocurrencies and everything that is happening in the world on central bank digital currencies as well. So I hope that answers your question. I hope that information will be useful.
No,
If people
it's good that you've provided stuff that is, lightweight if you just want to kind of dip your toe in and get a sense of it and see if it's for you. And if you decide that it's for you, much more, in-depth coverage all the way to like a master level. So I think it'll help everybody to kind of position themselves. If someone's listening and they have a bit more familiarity, they can start somewhere in the middle ground of that. And, if someone's totally, completely clueless, then they can go and start with the introductory courses. I mean, personally, I just did, I went on YouTube and I started watching videos and people explaining some of these concepts, and that's kind of how I started getting to grips with some of it. When I also was just like, what is this noise about fintech? What is all this about? And then I started on YouTube. So there's lots of avenues, but the I think the takeaway is everyone really just needs to take those steps to educate themselves, get informed about what's happening. So you're not just listening to conspiracy theories around 5G and all of this that is going to fry your brain and all the rest of the stuff that, you hear sometimes. And, you're understanding what is it in actuality and how does it impact my life. So I think all that information is very helpful. Thank you.
No, you're welcome. And you're welcome to share my email address with people out there. I'm more than happy to try and assist them and guide them where I can. I think perhaps just a last and closing remark. One of the courses that I did at UCT, specifically in the fintech space, I've actually taken that learning and applied it into the business that I currently run at this stage. And one of the most important things when you're entrepreneur, particularly in the fintech space, is to produce what is called a pitch deck, which in other words, if you are presenting your business plan or idea to a series of funders, what is the correct format and structure to utilize as well? And I've utilized that quite extensively. There are some valuable from learning the theory and the mechanics behind something. You can also apply some of those lessons in your sort of fintech startup if you wish to go that route as well. So that's just some experience I can share with you as far as that is concerned.
Awesome, and thank you too for the offer. I'll make sure I put your email address in the comments so that if anyone is wanting to get in touch and learn more and anything like that, they can definitely reach out to you. And on that note, I will say thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I know this was a great conversation, very informative, and a lot of people will benefit from it. So thank you so much, and I look forward to future conversations, when one day when cryptocurrency is the legal tender and we no longer have fiat currencies, I'll be calling you again and say, we've got to talk. We've got to have this conversation. So, don't lose my number.
No, you're on my contacts list, but thank you for the opportunity. I really enjoyed the conversation. I would like to go for another hour or two, but I'm respectful of people's time. But yeah, thank you. I think it's a very worthwhile discussion. I think a lot more of these need to take place ultimately going forward, so people can engage with the topic, debate about the topic, hopefully give some informed opinions about the topic. So I really am grateful for a platform like this, and thank you for the opportunity afforded this afternoon. I much appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Troy. So on that note, we'll call this live to an end. Thank you so much to everyone who jumped on board and, whether you popped in and popped out or stayed the whole conversation. Thank you so much for that. And, I'll let you know when the next compliance conversation takes place. But for now, we're going to say goodbye and have a great weekend. Bye, Troy.
Thank you, Kazai. Take care.
Cheers. Bye.